Thank you all for coming along. I'd like to thank Rob and the AWS user group guys for allowing me to come here and present tonight. I'd like to thank all of you for turning up, both on the evening of a public holiday tomorrow and also Avengers Endgame launched today. So half expected no one to be here and everyone to be at the movies. And my son, who's actually watching the live stream tonight, is very disappointed I'm not at the movies with him this evening. So my name is Nicholas Hollings. I am a Principal Global Solution Architect for a company called Equinix. I was told specifically no sales and advertising. However, it's probably useful to know who Equinix actually are. So we're a global data center interconnection company, probably the largest in the world. There's over 220 of our facilities, so it's easy to remember where we're not than where we are. So we're not in India, Africa, Russia, or New Zealand. But everywhere else, there's an Equinix facility within a local loop of your back-end networks. And on top of that, we have a platform called Equinix Cloud Exchange that connects all of those data centers together, and more importantly, connects you to the clouds that you're trying to consume. Obviously, the vastly superior one called AWS, but also the subpar ones that we've been talking about as well, mostly so you can migrate all your data out of those into AWS at high speed with low latency. Why Equinix is great for AWS. We host 26 of the AWS Direct Connect edges in Cloud DX edges in the globe, which puts us at about 25% of the AWS DX edges are inside an Equinix facility somewhere in the globe. Puts us far ahead of anybody else. The nearest competitor is a small company called Interconnection in EMEA that has about 9 of them, most of those in EMEA. So if you want to get to an AWS DX edge, mostly you're doing it through us. We also have connections through our ECX platform where we're not actually a DX edge provider, and you're most notably, for those of you in the room, because we're in Melbourne, down here is a tethered one from our Equinix Cloud Exchange, and you'll notice who it's actually in beside that. I don't mention that name for the same reason you guys don't say Azure very much. So that's who I am. There's 150 of me globally, or not me specifically, it's people like me. So if you're looking to do something with Amazon Direct Connect and connectivity into your cloud, likely somewhere in the globe has done that already. We've got the reference architecture and support for you, so if you want to know about that, we're willing to help you. So what is Direct Connect? How many of you use Direct Connect at the moment? Just a quick show of hands. So that's about a third of the room. Okay, so Direct Connect is private connectivity into AWS. So rather than using IPsec tunnels or VPN tunnels over the internet, you create a connection into an Amazon Direct Connect node, and from there you get private connectivity into the AWS infrastructure, both for VPC connectivity and for public service connectivity. So access to S3 and all the other public services can be done over that connection as well. You do that specifically because you're chasing bandwidth, lower the latency into AWS, and also for the ability to control the quality of that connection. If you go over the internet, you're never quite sure where it's going. Every so often some guy in Russia misconfigures BGP or DNS and all your traffic goes through Russia, much like all of the Visa cards. However, there are some difficulties in doing Direct Connect, and Amazon's recognised that over a period of time, and the model changed on the 19th of March. So there are a bunch of announcements that happened at that time. Most importantly, if you look up here, there are 2 models for connecting to Direct Connect. One is a single mode fibre cross connect. The other one is via a partner exchange service like our Equinix Cloud Exchange. There are other partner exchanges, and there are also telco exchanges that do MPLS inject as well. Most notably, the thing that changed on the 19th of March is what's in the little red box over here. Prior to the 19th of March, all partner exchanges that were on the official AWS platform were limited to 500 megabits per connection. That's obviously a bit of a problem if you want to do high speed, low latency connectivity. If you're shipping huge amounts of data in and out of AWS, 500 megabits is kind of not enough. So on the 19th of March, Amazon, after a whole lot of changes in their backend and now have launched 1 gig, 2 gig, 5 gig and 10 gig connectivity over partner exchanges. So you no longer have to go run a piece of single mode fibre directly into the DX edge in order to get 10 gig connectivity. Now, that's the AWS side was done. From a partner side, there were a bunch of hoops that had to be jumped through by the partners. We're probably going to be the first ones off the floor with the ability to do this over Cloud Exchange, mostly because our guys in Silicon Valley have been working directly with the AWS guys to try and get this program moving. We've submitted all of our paperwork on Tuesday last week, and we're looking at a mid-May launch to have that available. That's hot off the press. No one else knows that except YouTube now. So hopefully I don't get sacked next week, but there you go. So when the model changed, what happened? So when the Direct Connect model was first launched, there's kind of 3 ways to do things. You could do a single mode fibre cross connect, which is now called Direct Connect Dedicated, because Amazon at this website here has kindly codified all of the stuff that happens with Direct Connect now. So a lot of the terminology that was very confusing when it was used on 2 different labels for 2 different connectivity has now kind of been washed out. So Direct Connect Dedicated is the single mode fibre cross connect. So if you want to run a connection from your router directly into the Amazon edge, you will order a Direct Connect Dedicated. The process remains the same. Go to your Amazon console, order the Direct Connect. You'll get a letter of authority that's handed to your data center provider. That letter of authority has a demarc point where we run a cross connect directly into the Amazon edge. Under that model, you still do the virtual interfaces that you did before. If it's your account that ordered the Direct Connect, then that's a standard or private virtual interface, also known as a VIF, which I'll use from now on so I don't run out of words. If you have, under the same structure, the primary account that owns the Direct Connect, you have another account that you use for other reasons, then that becomes a hosted virtual interface or a hosted VIF. And you can repeat that out many times. You have the account that owns the Direct Connect is the primary, everything else is a hosted VIF. The model that was codified on the 19th of March is a hosted connection. Hosted connections are presented into your Amazon tenancy by an exchange partner such as us. What you do when you see that is you accept that connection, you connect it to a virtual interface, and then you plumb that into a VPC. And you can do that many times. You can accept as many hosted connections as you want, you can create as many virtual interfaces as you want, you plumb them onto as many VPCs as you want. The difference being that it's not part of your account structure. It's presented by the hosted connection partner on behalf of you, and you accept that. So you don't have that difference between a private virtual interface and a hosted virtual interface. The third one along here is the hosted virtual interface. So the hosted virtual interface was a way for exchange partners to provide connectivity to AWS without having to go through the network interface model and not having the 500 meg limit. So a lot of providers who initially started with Direct Connect basically bought 10 gig direct fibre cross connects, plugged them into the DX edge, and then multi-tenanted them on behalf of their downstream customers. When they did that, what they were actually doing is getting an account that belonged to them and then treating your accounts as a hosted virtual interface. So same as the first model, but the primary account holder is not you, it's a third party. That model is now deprecated and they're not provisioning any more of those from the 19th of March. It's very important if you are using any third-party provider at the moment, us included, please go and have a look at these 2 links, which will be on the slide deck when the deck's sent around, particularly this one down the bottom that delineates the different types of partners for you so that you can understand the model that your exchange partner is delivering from you. As I said, hosted connections in the middle there, 1, 2, 5, 10 gig by the mid-May on us. So what does that look like? It looks a bit like this if you're doing a Direct Connect dedicated. So you've run your single mode fibre directly into the DX edge. And I would point out at this point that I have used the brand new icons from AWS. This was pointed out to me by a peer of mine who reviewed this deck and went, I don't like these icons, what are you doing? They don't look like the ones I use. They're the ones Amazon just published. So you can blame Amazon for that, or alternatively just blame me and I'll go back to using the old icons. So the Direct Connect dedicated here, so this is a single account example. If you order your Direct Connect off the Amazon website, you get your letter of authority. We run that across to the rack that sits in our data center, or in whichever data center you're connecting in, connects to your router. And then just inside that Direct Connect, you create virtual interfaces and you attach them to virtual private gateways on each one of your VPCs. When you do that, the BGP conversation is held between the router and between your virtual interface. That then advertises routes up and down the Direct Connect, and you get what your MPLS will then see, your virtual private clouds. This example here is using one where you have multiple accounts. So you can see it's pretty much exactly the same process. The only difference is the terminology here where you have a hosted virtual interface on the second one. BGP is still between the virtual interfaces. You still attach them to virtual private gateways, one interface per virtual private gateway. And example number 3, which is the first example again, but what we've added in here is a public virtual interface. Public virtual interfaces are used to attach you to the public services of AWS. So anything that doesn't have an RFC 1918 address, which is pretty much everything except what sits in your virtual private clouds, and allows you to consume those down the Direct Connect. When you do that, essentially what you get is all of the routes for all of the public services for Amazon sent down your Direct Connect, and they hit the front side of your router. Be warned when you do that, it's quite a lot of routes. Because the paucity of public address space, all of the cloud providers, not just Amazon, but Azure and Google as well, are busily buying up every IPv4 they can find in whatever block they can get, which leads to a very large route table because a lot of it is non-summarizable. They just keep patching in as many addresses as they can at any given point. So that process then essentially means you need some sort of source NATing device sitting there. If you don't have that, you're going to get a whole bunch of public IP addresses landing on the center of your MPLS network, and depending on your MPLS provider, your MPLS is probably going to stop working. So don't do that. Don't be that guy. So connecting with a hosted connection, the primary difference here is that you can see that I've kind of grayed out the Direct Connect in the middle there because you don't actually go to your console and order a Direct Connect, and you don't get a letter of authority, and you don't run a single mode piece of fiber across a data center. What you do is you go to your exchange partner and say, I want to get a connection into AWS. For us, you would do that through our portal or our API. That presents a hosted connection to you. The new Amazon icon set for PowerPoint doesn't have every icon, so I've used this customer router here as a hosted connection. Once you have that hosted connection and you accept it, you create a virtual interface, you plumb that onto the hosted connection, and then you connect that to your virtual private gateway in your VPC, and you will have a connection that comes all the way back to the exchange. One thing to note here is that looking here, you'll have a single connection into the exchange provider and multiple connections coming in on the eastern side of that. The western side is a connection on Cloud Exchange. That's a single mode fiber that runs back to your router and becomes an 802.1q trunk. So whatever VLANs you have provisioned on the AWS side will get trunked down and dropped onto your router or switch on your side. So the way I describe this for a lot of people is that the difference between Direct Connect Dedicated and the hosted connection is Direct Connect Dedicated is a fire hose with a sprinkler on the end, and partner exchange models are typically a whole bundle of straws. So you take those straws, you can still get the same amount of bandwidth through them. The difference is how you deliver that service on the outside. I'm checking my watch because I definitely had till 7 a.m. So the problem of this, all of these connectivity types are great, but there are limitations to them. So it's important when you go and do these to have a look at these. so that you understand what the limitations are around how many of them you can put together. And because of these limitations, it's why Amazon's starting to build out other network constructs on top of this process to allow you to better address the problems that come along with having to have multiple virtual interfaces all plumbed into different VPCs, and then having all those VPCs peering with each other to try and exchange traffic internally. The first one of these is a Direct Connect gateway. How many of you have deployed one of these? Anyone? Everyone's scared of them. The problem with the Direct Connect gateway when it first came out was it wasn't multi-account. How many of you run only one account? Yeah, no hands. No one runs one account, right? That's just crazy talk. We're not animals here. So the problem with the Direct Connect gateway was it was only single account. That changed as well recently, so that's now multi-account, which makes it much more useful. So if you've not used one before, I encourage you to go back and have a look at the documentation for it. It is a bit more useful than it was before. And with it, you can do things like this, which is present a partner exchange model, create a private virtual interface, connect that to a Direct Connect gateway, and then plumb that out to multiple VPCs. So it allows you to then have a much more extensible model inside Amazon and still use that single conduit back to your MPLS network. It does make that network a lot simpler, particularly if you're using public VIFs, sorry. One of the problems with it though is it still has limitations. Most of those limitations, if you talk to anyone inside Amazon, generally relate to the monolithic nature of virtual private gateways. They're a bit like a VM running in one availability zone. They aren't that, but it's a bit like that conceptually. And they're not really that extensible. You start to run into limitations around the number of virtual private gateways that you can have on it, etc. So horizontal scalability is difficult with it. It's great for inter-region connectivity. Those of you who tried to do transit VPCs and a whole bunch of other stuff to get inter-region connectivity, that's really problematic. Virtual private gateways solve that. That leads you to what happened at reInvent in November last year, where they started to talk about transit gateways. Now, I do apologise. I was hoping to have a much more extensive talk about transit gateways and how they relate to Direct Connect, but Amazon was supposed to launch all of that at the end of Q1. They still haven't done so, so I have this. Here's one I prepared earlier. What I expect from transit gateways. So transit gateways is Amazon's horizontally scalable network service that allows you to clean up all of the problems that happen around VPC peering. If you've got lots of VPCs that are all peering with each other, you can run into lots of problems. Transit Gateway centralizes all of that and is on their new cell-based architecture, so it's horizontally scalable. So you can go out to well past any of the limitations that relate to Direct Connect Gateway or the VPC peering that happens now. Jeff Barr's blog has this diagram on it, and up here it says AWS Direct Connect Gateway. So my assumption here is that what will happen when Direct Connect is attached to transit gateways is that you'll have native support for being able to route traffic down Direct Connect back to the back-end networks. And then being able to stitch that into a route table. So at the moment, a lot of the design patterns for it use traditional transit VPCs to do this. So you'll have a Direct Connect gateway, you direct connect that to a transit VPC. That transit VPC is on a transit gateway, which then gives you transit all the way down for connectivity back into your Amazon network. That problem with transit VPCs is there's scalability issues with those, as well as availability issues with those, so they kind of want to remove that out of the picture and have native support. The last thing I wanted to mention tonight was AWS Private Link. Is anyone here using Private Link to get private addressing? Yep. Most of the problems I have with customers who try to connect to AWS or any other cloud is how do I get access to the public services, do that securely, and not have to use public IP addresses for my BGP conversations, and source natting and all the other things that go with it. There's just not enough IP space anymore. We were told ages ago we'd run out of it. I think we probably have now. I saw recently there's a IPv4 site now that auctions IPv4 space and sold a /18 for 350 grand. So if any of you are sitting on a large chunk of IPv4 space, now's the time to cash out. But what essentially Private Link does for you is provide you a private address space to attach to public services. There's a whole raft of AWS services that are being added into this. Once that happens, you get a private DNS entry. You can wash that DNS entry back to your on-prem as well, so your on-prem can also use that private connectivity. So go and use this and get rid of the public virtual interface and stop worrying about IPv4 address space. That's it. I'm done. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take any of them. Yep.
I'm curious whether you think that might actually now lower the threshold for more in the small and medium enterprise space to adopt Direct Connect. That was always a little bit of a deterrence, and it was always the big enterprises that would do it, and the rest of the plebs had to make do with private VPNs and that sort of thing.
So 3 things are happening in the marketplace, I think, that will change that. The first one is when this announcement came out, the hosted connectivity model that relates to us got a 33% price drop, which is a big price drop. The second one is there's a lot more people who have worked out that I've got real production workloads that run in the cloud, so network connectivity to those is much more important. And we're also starting to see a lot of the MPLS and network providers do direct injection into MPLS. So you've got Telstra's TPN, for example. Optus have a cloud product. So there's a lot of that brings that direct connect a lot closer because they're using gateways like us in the back end. Anybody else got any questions?
So I know you said the Transit Gateway wasn't yet complete, still under construction. Does that support multi-region, or not yet? Is it still all in the same region and it'll connect your VPCs?
No, it's my understanding Transit Gateway is multi-region as well. Yeah.
Was there any other questions?
Where did I get this fabulous shirt? No? You can thank my wife for it, it's great. Cool, thank you very much.
Nothing else? Great, thank you.